Welcome to Teachers Transition Podcast, a show dedicated to supporting teachers transition in, through, and out of education. Grab your seat and let's talk about how to make your next transition a successful one. Okay, good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you're listening from. My name is Alex Curtin, host of Teachers Transition Podcast. Today, I'm excited to have a colleague of mine who has a wealth of experience. She also had her podcast that helped me when I was a teacher. I got to work with her, see her grow, and it's an honor and privilege to have her. And I'm happy to announce that she's joining us today. Her name is Jessica Grant. Jessica, say hello and tell us kind of your background, your family life, and where you are now in life.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Alex. It's so nice to see you again after several years of not seeing you in person. I mean, we're still online, but still good to see you. I am a wife and mom of two girls. I actually have a daughter who's going into high school and a daughter who's going into college this year. So a lot of transitions at our home. I grew up with a very musical family. My mom was a music teacher and a pianist, and my dad sang in the church choir. And we just had music surrounding our lives growing up. At all times, I feel like music just was just a part of what we did growing up as a family. And I really just had a passion for it. And so I pursued being a music teacher and honestly wasn't sure how long I would teach in schools. I wanted to be a flight attendant too. I wanted to do some other things outside of music ed, and those opportunities never came because I just fell in love with teaching students and being with kids. And I transitioned from being an elementary music teacher into teaching middle school general music. And 2 years ago, I had the opportunity to pursue something within the school that I was already teaching at, and that is to be basically a vice principal for the middle school. The title is assistant head of middle school, but I was just excited to take what I've learned in the classroom and apply it to helping teachers and working with our school community. So that's kind of it in a nutshell.
I mean, that's a great background backdrop to our podcast today because the podcast is trying to help teachers that are trying to transition in. Because you and I know teachers, being a teacher is more than a title. It's something that it has to be innately in you. I my last guest last week talked about how she used to take her younger sisters, sit them on the couch and practice teaching. At a young age, like 8. It was innately in her. So today's podcast is definitely going to be helpful for those that are in the profession that maybe want to transition up or transition through, because as teachers we have different transitions. We start trying to get into a job and try to find our way and finally get into a school district and community where we feel like we are like that old you're old enough to know that cheers,
Yes.
a community where everyone knows your name, that kind of experience. So tell us kind of, was there any signs or any inklings that when you were a music teacher, and you still are, where you said, wait a minute, there's more for me than, I could have a bigger impact than just my, music students.
I feel like there were signs along the way, but I was always a little hesitant or um, anxious about making any shifts. I had a principal years ago who came and observed me and told me, she said, you have some skills in the classroom that others should see, that you could encourage other teachers. And she told me that I should be teaching teachers. And at the time, I was thinking, I appreciated the compliment, but thought, gosh, what do I have to share? So many other people have things that they're doing that are so much better than what I'm doing, and just I didn't really believe that I had things to share. And she just continued to encourage me and say, no, that these things you're doing with students are really impactful. you should go and teach other teachers how to do that. And then I did my ORF levels, I did Codi levels. And as I met with teachers and learned to just have a little more confidence in who I was and what I was doing with students and taking risks. I always have been a big believer in risks, and I think we think of like big risks when we say things like that, but it was really just the risk in allowing students to have more say in what we're doing in a piece,
Okay.
or learning to listen to my students and go, okay, how do I take their feedback and make things better? It was in those small steps within a lesson that I started to take more risks. And as I took risks, I really just decided to open myself up. And it really started with the podcast, where I just felt like, I get nervous, or I got more nervous when I was a younger teacher, being in front of an adult crowd. I was fine in front of students, but being in front of adults made me more nervous. And so I learned to really share behind a microphone for the podcast. And by creating things and sharing what I was doing in the classroom that way, it then led into opportunities to be able to share with teachers in person and just growing my confidence. And just, I think that belief in ourselves, which sounds so cheesy, but it really is true, to just be able to trust that you have things that are helpful for other teachers. And
Absolutely.
so that really started from my principal saying and seeing something in me and saying, you should try to teach teachers. You have something to share, and just having that encouragement. And so I think that's really when it was planted in me that I could influence others and help other people.
Sure. Well, let's talk about that podcast because I'm sure there are, music teachers that are like, looking for opportunities now. It is now, the summer, and this is the time to plan. Can you share where we can find your podcast and, kind of a little snapshot of, what we can get grabbed? Because if you haven't seen Jessica, and I've seen Jessica before she had her podcast, she's brilliant, has a wealth of knowledge, has great guests, and whether you're a music teacher or a regular teacher, she's inspirational. So can share, about your podcast.
Sure. It's called How to Teach Music with Jessica Grant. That title actually came from my friend Beth, who we were brainstorming together about what it could be. And she's like, well, you teach music. Why not? How to teach music. And so the whole podcast premise is just basically sharing individual lesson ideas. It involves conversations like we're having with other educators and what they're doing in the classroom. I usually did a summer series. A couple summers ago, it was focused on specific planning, long range planning, short range planning, how to use your summer to really build out your coming year. Um, there's things like that within the podcast, but it's really just my hope was that it would be encouraging, and also that it would give lots of ideas for, here's a lesson idea for if you're teaching a pentatonic scale, here's a lesson idea for if you're working with kindergarten students. So it covers a wide range of everything from elementary teaching to middle school general music. There's not so much band, orchestra, choir. There's some choir episodes, but the main gist of it is really a K through 8 approach to general music.
And I will attest that if you haven't subscribed, please do. A wealth of, again, great resources, great guests. So, pivoting from that, let's go to the moment or the opportunity that presented itself for you to transition. Because, I'm sure that people are like, okay, how did you go from teacher to administrator? Because that is a big hurdle, a big challenge. And some people, they go through, okay, I'm going to, get the degree, the master's degree. I might go through, if there's a possibility in my district, for some kind of principal program if they have it, and kind of walk us through those moments.
Sure. I think mine is almost a little backwards than
Okay.
how most do it. And I think part of the reason for that is because I went from working in public school and I'm at a private school. And so because of that, sometimes the certifications might look different. And while I had a master's degree, I did not have a master's in leadership. And so when the opportunity presented itself, that was something that I, you know, looking back on, I don't believe that I would have the same opportunity in public school because I would not have had what I needed to
Sure.
be able to transition into this role. But that being said, I had been at this school for 8 years teaching music and absolutely loved my role. And the opportunity opened up, and I talked it over with my husband and was like, I'm kind of feeling like I should apply for this position. The requirements that were there for the job, I felt like were things that I had already implemented in some ways. For example, I had been on certain committees that were a part of pieces of my job. I had also been a part of a scheduling committee, and scheduling is a big part of the AP portion. I was an advisor for students in fifth grade and 1 year in sixth grade. And so I was in communication with parents a lot and helping serve with student support plans. And so pieces of this job I felt like I was already doing in a different way, but I
Mhm.
had been a part of. And so I had a little bit of a vision of what this role might entail. And I also had been under our head of middle school and our head of school um, in working with them and having meetings with them. And I loved the vision that our head of middle school has in putting students' needs first. And she's got a real big heart for making sure that we are serving students and considering what we're doing for students and all of the different processes and procedures that we do. And so I applied for the job and had multiple interviews and was fortunate to get the position. And so as soon as I got the position, I also applied to go and get my master's degree at the exact same time.
Oh,
So I
wow.
ended up getting, I had a master's degree, but I got a second master's degree the first year that I was in this position. So 2 years ago. So it was new position and
So,
master's degree at the same time. And that was a lot. And at the same time, it was like I was continually learning in classes and interacting with people and my mentors and professors while also putting it into practice in the daily life
sure.
and having conversations with our head of middle school and really spending a lot of time listening and learning from her, observing her, taking in the way that she handled hard situations or just daily tasks. And so and I may have gotten off a tangent from your original question,
No,
but
go ahead.
the
Sure.
the main thing being that just I think it worked out well because I knew the community. I had been a part of different aspects of this position, but now, you know, being in this position, it looks slightly different. And of course, I've learned so much more,
Yeah.
but it was just exciting to go from helping students and helping music teachers to then going, okay, maybe this is a next step where I can still support students, I can still help teachers, and I still absolutely love and value music education, of course. It just looks a little bit different now in
Yes.
supporting.
No, absolutely. And, you mentioned how, your process might have been reversed, but going through the process myself, actually, it's great because you got to do practical hours. So you are working a real job. You're not just talking about scenarios. You're actually, hey, this happened
Living it.
exactly. And, you have access to, professionals that can speak to those things. So I think that's, when I think about it now, it's a great hand in hand experience because, you're living an experience. It's almost like we all have to do student teaching in an undergraduate. You had the job, so it
Yes.
sounds like a great opportunity. So you know talk about it because this is a transitional time. You know there are a lot of teachers now. And I usually say these kind of questions for the end, but a lot of teachers make critical decisions at the end of the school year,
Mhm.
whether it's I'm going to go for the administration, degree, or I'm going to try to get into the AP pool, or I'm going to now transition out because my time, I want to move onto something else. I need to make that big leap. And can you talk with us about, if someone's looking to make a transition, let's say into administration, what kind of advice during this critical time where it's a summer and, what kind of advice would you give them to kind of, if they're going to through that path, what would you say to them right now?
Oh, I think if you're trying to figure out whether or not you even want to make the transition, maybe it's kind of like those beginning seeds, like when that principal was feeding into me of you should teach teachers, where you're contemplating and thinking. I do a lot of writing things down, pros and cons lists, and just really evaluating, how I might want to look for jobs. Is it more, do you want to build more networking skills? Do you want to take some summer PD courses? Do you, you know, sorry, it's taking me a minute to think on this one. Um, I would say in this time, just really focusing on the things that you're excited about in terms of opportunities, and then looking for ways to learn from that. There are so many great conferences out there and so many great books. One of my favorite books is by Simon Sinek, The Leaders Eat Last. That's a great one. And then From Teacher to Leader by Star Sackstein. That was another fantastic one that really helped me. And those were books that I read prior to making the shift as well. And I would just say, if you're feeling like it's time to make a shift, I've always felt like it never hurts to look at opportunities and to put yourself out there
Sure.
and to just see what doors open. If you even just get an interview, but maybe you don't get the job, there's something to learn from that interview.
Yes.
And to be able to just say, okay, this is something I'm interested in. You go in, you put the application in, and then as you're meeting with people and potentially having interviews on phone or in person, you can learn a lot about what you're looking for and what excites you and what interests you, so that then maybe more of how you want to transition to what you want to transition to.
No, that's great advice. Preparation and, not just, it's more than just taking that leap. It's also being prepared, to prepared if you want to make that leap, but doing the preparation so that it's not such a unknown, or,
Yes.
I'm just going to go for it, um,
And knowing more of what you want or why you want it, rather than just, oh, I'm so ready to not teach, or I'm so ready for a change. But
yes,
then, do you really know what exactly it is that you're wanting to do? And, not being afraid to look into other things, but really understanding what excites you, what
yeah.
gets you, you know, motivated and happy, and in the skills too. I think it's knowing yourself and knowing, what do I enjoy about the job that I'm doing now, and how can those skills relate to another position?
Absolutely. And I love how you said earlier that someone else saw your potential. I think, that's important because if other people that you look up to and respect see it in you, that's a good sign. Sometimes it worries me when someone goes for something and no one else could see. Not that we don't believe in a person, but there should be a community of voices, people that you trust to say, yeah, Jessica, I see that, and I've spent, 3 summers with you, and, you know, deep in the churches back at SNU, and
Yes.
I saw those qualities back then, in you, and I know
Thank
that,
you.
we had to give, these lessons, and it was intense. Every
Yeah.
every day for 3 weeks. It was the most intense time of my life, uh, professionally, to do that. But every time I saw you and some other colleagues, we we were able to see, wow, they are a great teacher. We see those qualities even under the stress of in professional development. So,
Yeah. And speaking that out, because I think so often too, that's part of what I love about my job is is being able to encourage and to speak out the things that you see about others. Because so often, we'll think, and I'm still guilty of this, I'll think something about someone that's like, oh my gosh, the work they're doing is so amazing.
Hmm.
And I love the way that they planned this out, or I love the creative aspect. And I don't often tell them. And
Yes.
it's like telling people is so impactful. And you never know, those words stick with you. It's like, I'm sure my principal would never know. So I should probably go back and tell her how meaningful that was, that she saw that in me when I was not in a place to see it in myself. And so just asking the people around you, I ask my husband quite often, and I have a couple of close friends where I can go to them and say, hey, what is it that, I can do better? And what is it that you see in me that I can, that's really working well? And just having those people. And if you don't have those people, I'd encourage you to go to trainings or to just, check in with your team, build those relationships at your school over time. It takes time to
It
get to that comfort level.
it does. It does. And in preparation, now, you know, um, you're now preparing for another school year, and teachers, one of the things, we kind of just chill out, and I'm not teaching, in the traditional setting, but remembering back when I was teaching, it's almost like the, sports, after the season's over, you chill out and then you get back into your working shape. But for administrators, there's not much of a as much of a downtime. There's a little bit, but it's not like, you know, so can you talk about how you prepare? Because right now, you're thinking, about the next year, students, programming, and for sometimes administrators, this is the much more busy time of year because, you have to make sure everything's running in August, September. So how do you prepare yourself mentally, professionally, and emotionally, for the new school year? And in this case, for the
Absolutely.
newer role.
So summer is such a gift and it's quieter.
Mhm.
Um, the campus is just quieter. I miss all the interactions with the colleagues and the students, and at the same time, it's kind of just that sense of I'm less reactive
Okay.
and can be more proactive because of my role with the discipline and the students coming in and out of offices or parent meetings, things like that. Those are sometimes more reactive based on what's going on in the classroom. And in the summer, I can be quite a bit more proactive because I know there's going to be less times where I'm pulled. And so the summer months, what I found in this is my third summer working as an administrator. And what I found is that you're still kind of closing out the previous year through, I would say we're still closing it out in June.
Yes.
Classes ended right before Memorial Day for me. So we're a couple weeks into summer, and it'll probably take another week, maybe 2 weeks
Okay.
before everything, including the grading system, the organization of files, just making sure that everything is put in, and we're having still some parent meetings at the end, just in response to the end of the year. We've done that every year to voice and hear parent concerns or even concerns for the coming year. So we do a lot of that in June. And then end of June to July, we really start diving into next year. We've already done some things for next year, but we start getting into advisory placements. We start getting into class lists, class schedules, teacher schedules. We also start vision work and really looking at, how did the year go for our teachers and our students, and what things do we want to tweak, whether it's if it's curriculum related. Oftentimes we've already started that in the spring. Teachers will come in and do summer work. We'll meet with them on that. But then a lot of it, like professionally, is attending. We have an ISAS heads conference that it happens in June.
Okay.
I've gone to that the past 2 years, or last year. I'm not able to go this year, but there's a lot of online materials and things that I read from there, from ISAS, that's helpful. And then AMLE is also a wonderful organization that I did professional development with Lori, our head of middle school, last year, and we went to a conference and really connected with others who are doing the same work in middle school. And so taking that and learning from that and going, okay, what did we learn even last summer that we maybe started implementing that we want to do a more thorough job in? And then what are some things that, how do we want to take a theme for the year and really work that through not only our staff meetings, but in what we do in advisories and how we interact with teachers. So
Mhm.
it's a lot of forward facing work that allows us to really look at overall, what are the trends that we saw last year? What are teachers needing? What worked, what didn't work, and then gathering teachers to go, okay, whether it's department leaders or division leaders, whether it's the fine arts team going, okay, we want to work with this specific team on this specific thing, get their input, and then figure out what works best for them and incorporate it next year. So it's a lot of planning and a lot of just assessing and evaluating what worked, what didn't, how can we make shifts? Lori always says, any change in schools is like turning the Titanic. It's like you're never going to just automatically make this change and everything shifts and works. It's like you've got this big building that you are trying to really help this whole community. So as you make shifts, it slowly, slowly, slowly turns, and you have to just work with patience through that. And I think the summer months are such a great time to really do some reflection and some assessing and some planning, but also remembering that anything that we are working on is impacting teachers and students. And so getting those conversations going and having teachers coming in and conversations. So it's not just we're putting this in place, here's what you need to do. Here's more our thoughts on what could be done. What are your thoughts on how this might be incorporated? It reminds me of orf work in the music world, honestly, just taking it's like here's our plan and we're going to implement this lesson, okay, and then as the students give you feedback and give you input, you adjust and the lesson morphs into where it ends up going. And it's the same with leadership. You have these ideas, but getting teachers to have voice in that is so, so important, and then seeing how it's working for students and getting the students to respond back. So summer is just a lot of, I'm a little repetitive, but really is a lot of reflection and
Yeah.
then assessing.
Wow. Wow. It sounds like a big job, and I know it is a big job. And if I want, I would like our listeners to kind of hear about how, you mentioned, I think, Lori, and
Mhm.
who were the mentors to help you transition? Because I'm sure probably your third year, you're like, okay, this is a little familiar. Plus, in the first year and taking a graduate program was a different scenario. So, can you talk about the Loris and the mentors and the people that's helped you transition from where you were to where you are now, or where you want?
Absolutely. Yeah, I could not have done it without the people around me. Lori Rolke is our head of middle school, and she and I work side by side. I've always referred to myself as her sidekick just because, she's head, I'm assistant head, and everything we do impacts our community and our middle school. And so being able to understand Lori's vision for our middle school and then being able to support that and work alongside her and really listen and learn from her. The most important things I think that I've learned from my relationship with Lori is just to be able to watch and observe and ask lots and lots of questions because she has been an administrator for far longer than I have, and she's worked in public schools and private. And so just her knowledge of how to get teams to work together, how to interact with teachers, how to build programs and develop curriculum is really vast. She's really, really good at seeing a lot of the data and taking the data, but making it more personable. And she's fantastic at keeping it kid facing and keeping it focused on students. So she's been a gift. I have spent probably more time in her office than I did my own, especially in the first year, as I would sit at the table and she'd be at her desk and we'd have conversations to really build upon not only knowing each other, because we knew each other in a different way since I was a teacher. She was an admin, but how do you work together as two admins? And so we spent a lot of time discussing things. And learning even down to taking notes in a meeting and being able to, share things such as like when you're in a meeting with a big group of people, writing the names of every person who's in that meeting, the date, the time, the main topic, and then taking notes because then when you refer back, it's like, oh, so and so was in this meeting. Okay, I can go back and ask them so we can compare and go, okay, did I miss something here? Or, when we talked about planning this thing a month out, there's somebody exactly who was there, but things like that that I would not have thought of. So she was a huge mentor, and of course, it's the day in, day out. And then I also had Beth Mellon Nelson, who's in Minnesota. She made the transition from being a music teacher to being a head of school up in Minnesota. And so I actually contacted her, and it was right as I was in the application process to go, I'm considering applying for this job. And what has it been like to go from teaching music to administration? Do you miss it? Do you, what were challenges? Because she also transitioned at her own school. And so having her to be able to just give feedback on her experience of what it was like and for her to say, I love both and there's creativity in both and you'll really enjoy the admin side if you have the opportunity as well was really helpful because it was a positive experience to learn from too. So those were honestly the two people who really helped me out a lot.
Awesome, awesome. Thank you to those individuals. It definitely takes a village, even for leaders.
Yes,
Um, I want to pivot, and I know this is not a question that I sent you, but this has always been an interesting subject where you go from, being a teacher, and then you have the viewpoint of being an administrator. Um, of course, as a teacher, we often kind of focus on our classroom as like everything everything evolves around that, and of course administrator has to think about the whole school or the
yes,
um so can you talk about that change? And I'm assuming your focus was more narrow because that's kind of typically our focus because we're product
yes.
management. How did that can you talk about that and how did that shift going from a teacher to administrator and how your viewpoint kind of shifted? Was there any aha moments?
Oh yeah. It's amazing when you shift from teacher to admin because you always wonder, or I always wondered as a teacher, why was that decision made? Or, we're implementing it this way. And
Yeah.
of course,
Need
we
to know.
all
Uh-huh.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I said it to the need to know basis.
Yes, yes. And also just more like, well, I would go, okay, we're going to implement this, but how is this going to work? And are we sure we want to do it this way or did they consider this? And usually the answer is yes. In those meetings that teachers are not in, it's, oh, I wonder what this would work or this would work. And let's put it out there and get teacher feedback. And there's a lot of consideration in those meetings for how things are going to work for teachers. But as a teacher, you don't see that side of things. So you just see what's coming to you. And sometimes it's hard to wrap your head around because you haven't had time to process it in the same amount of time as an administrator has because of the pre meetings before talking with teachers. And I think the aha moments were, you're I knew more about the music, art, theater world on our campus and less about what was going on in other departments. One of the benefits I did have was having both of my daughters go through the school and having, Julia was still my youngest. When I took this job, she was in sixth grade. And so the past 3 years, she has also been a student at the school. So that wearing that hat of parent admin can also be tricky, just like being parent teacher can be tricky. And so I feel like I had a good insight into what teachers were teaching, how students were learning, but being able to go into teacher classrooms and actually see them in action is one of the coolest and most amazing parts of my job because there's great work being done by teachers and as a teacher it's like I knew what I was pouring into my students in the music room, but getting to go into classrooms and see all these different styles of teaching and people just as passionate about, you know, language arts and math and Spanish as I was about music is just the most amazing thing to see in place. So I think one of the aha moments was just being able to see people teaching different subject areas with so much passion was so encouraging. And I also think that an aha moment was just in figuring out um, the gifts that teachers bring that are really unique to their classroom that you don't see outside when you're just interacting with them teacher to teacher. And so as an admin, you know, teachers will send you every now and again, they'll send pictures of what's going in the classroom or Lori and I will get a text, hey, we're working on this project. If you have a moment to step in, we'd love for you to see what's going on. And so we try to take advantage of that as much as we can. And I think it's just so neat to see the giftings of these people in the education world and to just be able to encourage them in that because you don't often get to see that when you're teaching alongside and you've got your teaching schedule.
Yes, yes. I mean, that's great insights. Um, I'm a part of some Facebook groups. And one of them is, are teacher related or leaving teachers or, teachers that are frustrated. Um, what encouragement can you say to that teacher that's had a hard time with the administrator that, really didn't address their needs or there's a, how, or maybe, or how do you navigate when you're experiencing, the pushback from teachers? Because sometimes, teachers feel like the administrators are the enemy, and I don't know if you want to talk about, that dynamic as well, because now I'm sure maybe you are, the administrator of some of your colleagues, so you can speak to some of that.
That is so, it's hard and it's real
Mhm.
because I mean, I was in the classroom about 21, 22 years and over that time you do feel even in the best of circumstances it's a tiring job and you just it's an easy job to get burned out in and to get defeated in and to not feel like the work you're doing is enough.
Mhm.
And so I would say to those teachers who are feeling that you know, use this summer right now to rejuvenate,
Yes.
literally turn things off. I know our school we have to check in once a week to just look at email, but do that check in and then let it be and try to just do some things, whether it's sleeping for me, a lot of times in summer it's extra sleep, drinking more water. I mean, it's just some of the basics that we just don't do for ourselves in the school year and that makes such a difference. And also just um, it's so hard because there's not an easy fix to it. And
Sure.
when you're in a circumstance where you don't see eye to eye with your administrator or you don't feel like your work is recognized or you have an administrator who you just feel like you're working against each other than together with, I would say find a person that you can trust, that you can talk to, whether that's, it's great if it can be your spouse. It's also great if it's a colleague who teaches music in another school who maybe understands and just have that safe person that you can talk to while also investing in some friendships that can build you up. I found that a lot with our North Texas ORF group
Okay.
and with the Kodai groups and just being able to be around other educators who do what you do and understand the value of what you do because oftentimes as music teachers we often feel kind of like that stepchild at times as a specials teacher. It feels different than a classroom teacher, but just finding ways to find your value in what you're doing that edifies you in a way that can allow you to keep going even when you're having a difficult relationship with your administrator. And that's hard because you may even go to the administrator if you're comfortable and talk to them. That can be really challenging too.
Yes.
Um, and and use wisdom in that and how you do that. I would say, me going from teacher at the school to admin at the school has come with a lot of conversations around, I was a peer and now I'm an admin. And so the things I do, not everyone is going to understand or agree with. And just really trying to be transparent as I can and honest as I can and honestly owning my mistakes. That has been huge because as a new admin, I'm going to make mistakes. I know in the year ahead and 10 years down the road, I'm still going to be making mistakes, but owning those, and there have been some that have been relational where I've had to really go, wow, I did not handle that well, and being able to say, you know what, I'm going to meet with this person and talk through what happened, how it impacted them, how I could have handled that better. And I know I'm grateful Lori is the exact same way where we will have those hard conversations with teachers, whether it's together or separate. And I think it just takes really a lot of vulnerability and a lot of just openness on the person as the administrator. And I realize not every admin is going to be that way, but that's something that I'm really working towards and working on because I'm not going to be a perfect leader. And so it's being able to work through those relational things for the betterment of my relationship with people and also theirs with students and theirs with each other. And so just trying to be a great example in that and to learn from it so I can do better by the people I'm serving.
I mean, that's great because being open, transparent, and also acknowledging when appropriate that hey, that was nothing. As teachers, I think as an experienced teacher, sometimes we forget that the person that's administrator is also human. You know,
Yeah.
we just see they're not so much they're against us, but they're always telling us to do, or they don't
Yes.
they're pushing these initiatives. But definitely when I went through administrative process and doing little tasks here and there and counsel, you know it's not an easy job.
Yeah.
So but it's also encouraging that you're still in touch, with being a teacher, and also in touch with the fact that hey, this is someone's feelings, this is someone,
Yeah.
because that goes a long way. Like you said, during the school year, a lot of situations are reactive because of what happened in the classroom. It's nice when someone can be proactive to kind of and it makes me think about there needs to be more conversations. Now of course I know every administrator is not going to be willing to do that.
Everyone leads differently.
That
Yeah.
and that to each his own. But I think this conversation, I think, is insightful to help teachers to kind of you know demystify some of the conceptions that we have. And also to say, hey, we, if possible, in the right setting, and it might not be possible in your school setting, to maybe have more conversations, that are proactive in the
Yeah.
beginning. Because oftentimes they are reactive to, I didn't get this from my classroom, or I didn't get this, or you're expecting me to take this kid that's had trouble with every other class, and
Yeah.
it gets frustrating. So definitely, your transparency, and also, how you lead is important. You know,
Mhm.
I've been in situations where I would go above and beyond for certain leaders because just of how they led. You know,
Yes. Same.
yeah,
Same. And one of the things that I think is hard too is it's as a teacher, it's like I always wanted to see my administrator, not like constantly, but just having them visible makes a big difference. Because I feel like then they feel like we're partnering together and it's not just like you're off doing, it's hard for teachers to know what administrators are actually doing when they're in their offices. I feel like it's like a lot of times I'm sitting a lot more or I'm at a computer and it's like, oh, well, I don't know. Whatever teachers think, I don't even remember what I thought admin did. I think I just didn't think about it. It was more like they're there, but they're not here. They're not seeing what's happening. And
Yeah,
it's hard to balance those responsibilities in getting the things done that need to get done outside of being around teachers. And I think one of the things that's been really helpful is to just do some of the more mundane duties that lets teachers know, yes, we're asking you to do these initiatives or we're implementing these things, but it's not just us sitting up here doing whatever we're doing and you go do all the work. It's like as simple as, hallway transitions. When we have hallway transitions, if I'm free and this is not a planned out every single day, but if I hear kids in the hall, just going out and standing in the hall, interacting with students, checking on teachers, and it really doesn't take but like 2 or 3 minutes, or
yeah,
doing carpool duty, or at lunch. I really, really struggled my first year to find a time to eat lunch, which is funny because I thought, oh, as an admin, my schedule is like more open. I'll actually get a lunch. Maybe I'll actually get 15 minutes to sit. No, it doesn't happen. And oftentimes you get to 2 p.m. and you're like, oh my gosh, I need to sit down and take a minute. And so this year, my goal was to drink water and to make sure to eat lunch every day. And one of the ways I made that happen was by going to the cafeteria and doing cafeteria duty with middle school teachers, because then I could sit with those teachers. The kids are out, they're eating. I can check in on kids, but then I'm actually getting the food myself too. So I think as you make those transitions, or if people are considering admin, just looking for ways that you can kind of do both some of those self-need things, the basics like eating lunch, and also checking in with teachers, because I think it speaks to them that, like, hey, I'm in the work with you, and that visibility makes a difference.
awesome, awesome. I want to end this very insightful podcast with talking about something you said earlier that you guys are going to be vision casting or thinking about what the school year is going to be, kind of doing an analysis of how it was last year. I don't want to say, so how would you, looking ahead, how do you hope to inspire or support the next generation of teacher leaders in your school?
You know, I think the best way, if I'm thinking about like how I would set a goal to inspire someone, I think it would be to really find ways to help other people see within themselves what
Mm,
they can do. Because there are plenty of people out there where I'm like, wow, I'm so inspired by the work they do. Um, but you know, how to do that yourself. And I feel like it's the people that I find the most inspiring are the people where I'm like, wow, look at the amazing work they're doing. And they're giving me the ability to impact my own world too. And
yeah,
so being able to inspire someone by encouraging them, showing up, identifying their strengths, and figuring out ways that they can grow in their role. Because you've got teachers who they're either new or they've taught for a while, but maybe they're still figuring out certain pieces of curriculum, or they're still figuring out how to build relationships with students, or they've got areas that they need to grow in. But in order to grow in those areas, if all we do is point out where they need to grow, it can be really defeating. I think people need to know, here's what you're gifted in, here's what you do really, really well. Keep building this up. And along the way, let's incorporate this one thing here where we're just looking at this one area of the curriculum and designing the lesson and not focusing so big picture, but it's like acknowledging their strengths and then helping them find one thing to do that will help them. And I think the best way that I have found the last few years to support teachers is literally just listening.
mm,
Sometimes teachers will stop by just to vent about their day or to share something about what happened in a classroom, and they don't even want constructive criticism. They don't want anything other than to just share, hey, today was really hard. this is what happened. And then you can ask them, is there something you need or want out of this? And sometimes they're like, no, I just need you to listen. Or if this happens again, can we talk through how we can work together with the student? And so I think the more that I can listen as a leader, the more that is going to allow teachers to find ways to grow in their roles. And then we talk a lot about taking risks in education, but I think that taking risks sometimes just means doing one small thing that you're interested in doing, but either afraid to do or uncertain of how to do it, and just helping teachers take those risks and then allowing them to learn from it. There was a quote, I think it was by um, Sackstein, and she said, I'll make many mistakes, but I'm not afraid because they're opportunities for amazing growth. And I feel like that is just life in general. So, in order to help teachers, I think it's not only allowing them to take risks, but to realize that there's going to be some growth in that, and the process is going to be messy, and not to expect that every risk is actually going to work either. And so allowing teachers to take risks that may or may not work, but to learn from it, whichever way it goes.
Awesome, awesome. Well, thank you so much for giving us so much great insight. We appreciate what you're doing during the last 22 years and what you're going to do the next 5, 10, 15, however you're going to be in education. And we hope that our guests will uh, take one or two nuggets. I mean, you've dropped a lot of gems, and uh,
Good.
I think it's going to help encourage a lot of teachers, especially during this time where we got through the year and now they're going to have to, take some time to recover, recuperate, and get ready for another exciting year. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Alex.
And thanks for joining us today. Please like, subscribe, and share this episode with a colleague. Keep learning, keep growing, and never stop believing in your impact because you truly make a difference.